This is Jackanory Antarctica. The Magic Finger by Roald Dahl, Part 2. Mr. and Mrs. Gregg ran to the window and looked out. The two tiny boys were now high up in the sky. Then Mrs. Gregg said to Mr. Gregg, "Do you think we could do that, my dear?" "I don't see why not," Mr. Gregg said. "Come on, let's try." Mr. Gregg began to flap his wings hard, and all at once, up he went. Then Mrs. Gregg did the same. "Help!" she cried as she started going up. "Save me!" "Come on," said Mr. Gregg. "Don't be afraid." So out the window they flew, far up into the sky, and it did not take them long to catch up with Philip and William. Soon the whole family was flying around and around together. "Oh, isn't this lovely?" cried William. "I've always wanted to know what it feels like to be a bird." "Your wings are not getting too tired, are they, dear?" Mr. Gregg asked Mrs. Gregg. "Not at all," Mrs. Gregg said. "I could go on forever." "Hey, look down there," said Philip. "Someone is walking in our garden." They all looked down, and there below them, in their own garden, they saw 4 enormous wild ducks. The ducks were as big as men, and what is more, they had great long arms, like men, instead of wings. The ducks were walking in a line to the door of the Greggs' house, swinging their arms and holding their beaks high up in the air. "Stop!" called the tiny Mr. Gregg, flying down low over their heads. "Go away! That's my house!" The ducks looked up and quacked. The first one put out a hand and opened the door of the house and went in. The others went in after him. The door shut. The Greggs flew down and sat on the wall near the door. Mrs. Gregg began to cry. Oh dear, she sobbed. "They have taken our house. What shall we do? We have no place to go." Even the boys began to cry a bit now. "We will be eaten by cats and foxes in the night," said Philip. "I want to sleep in my own bed," said William. "Now then," said Mr. Gregg, "it isn't any good crying. That won't help us. Shall I tell you what we are going to do?" "What?" they said. Mr. Gregg looked at them and smiled. "We are going to build a nest." "A nest?" they said. "Can we do that?" "We must do it," said Mr. Gregg. "We've got to have somewhere to sleep. Follow me." They flew off to a tall tree, and right at the top of it, Mr. Gregg chose the place for the nest. "Now, we want sticks," he said. "Lots and lots of little sticks. Off you go, all of you, and find them and bring them back here." "But we have no hands," said Philip. "Then use your mouths." Mrs. Gregg and the children flew off. Soon they were back, carrying sticks in their mouths. Mr. Gregg took the sticks and started to build the nest. "More," he said. "I want more and more and more sticks. Keep going." The nest began to grow. Mr. Gregg was very good at making the sticks stick together. After a while he said, "That's enough sticks. Now I want leaves and feathers and things like that to make the inside nice and soft." The building of the nest went on and on. It took a long time, but at last it was finished. "Try it," said Mr. Gregg, hopping back. He was very pleased with his work. "Oh, isn't it lovely?" cried Mrs. Gregg, going into it and sitting down. "I feel I might lay an egg any moment." The others all got in beside her. "How warm it is," said William. "And what fun to be living so high up," said Philip. "We may be small, but nobody can hurt us up here." "But what about food?" said Mrs. Gregg. "We haven't had a thing to eat all day." "That's right," Mr. Gregg said. "So we will now fly back to the house and go in by the open window and get a tin of biscuits when the ducks aren't looking." "Oh, we will be pecked to bits by those dirty great ducks," cried Mrs. Gregg. "We shall be very careful, my love," said Mr. Gregg, and off they went. But when they got to their house, they found all the doors and windows were closed. There was no way in. "Just look at that beastly duck cooking at my stove," cried Mrs. Gregg as she flew past the kitchen window. "How says she. Just look at that one holding my lovely gun, shouted Mr. Gregg. One of them is lying in my bed, yelled William, looking into a top window. And one of them is playing with my electric train, cried Philip. Oh dear, said Mrs. Gregg. They have taken over our whole house. We shall never get it back. And what are we going to eat? I will not eat worms, said Philip. I would rather die. Or slugs, said William. Mrs. Gregg took the two boys under her wings and hugged them. Don't worry, she said. I can mince it all up very fine, and you won't even know the difference. Lovely slug burgers, delicious worm burgers. Oh no, cried William. Never, said Philip. Disgusting, said Mr. Gregg. Just because we have wings, we don't have to eat bird food. We shall eat apples instead. Our trees are full of them. Come on. So they flew off to an apple tree. But to eat an apple without holding it in your hands is not at all easy. Every time you try to get your teeth into it, it just pushes you away. In the end, they were able to get a few small bites each. And then it began to get dark. So they all flew back to the nest and lay down to sleep. It must have been at about this time that I, back in my own house, picked up the telephone and tried to call Philip. I wanted to see if the family was all right. Hello? I said. Quack, said a voice at the other end. Who is it? I said. Quack, quack. Philip? I said. Is that you? Quack, 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 quack. Oh, stop it, I said. Then there came a very funny noise. It was like a bird laughing. I put the phone down quickly. Oh, that magic finger, I cried. What has it done to my friends? That night, while Mr. and Mrs. Gregg and Philip and William were trying to get some sleep up in the high nest, a great wind began to blow. The tree rocked from side to side, and everyone, even Mr. Gregg, was afraid that the nest would fall down. Then came the rain. It rained and rained, and the water ran into the nest, and they all got as wet as could be, and oh, what a bad, bad night! At last the morning came, and it was with warm sun. Well, said Mrs. Gregg, thank goodness that's over. I never want to sleep in a nest again. She got up and looked over the side. Help! She cried. Look down there! What is it, my love? Said Mr. Gregg. He stood up and peered over the side. He got the surprise of his life. On the ground below them stood the 4 enormous ducks, as tall as men, and 3 of them were holding guns in their hands. One had Mr. Gregg's gun, one had Philip's gun, and one had William's gun. The guns were all pointing right up at the nest. See what happens in part 3. But for now, good night.